Good afternoon. Grace and peace in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. We gather this afternoon to give thanks to God for the life of Albert Joseph Fleig, to receive the comfort of the Holy Spirit, and to proclaim the good news of life eternal made possible in God's love. For we know that the Spirit is with us, for those gathered here in this space and those who are connecting wherever they are, especially here with Venus and Allison and David and Al's family, holding us in these tender moments and letting us know that His Spirit continues to live on in us. And so I invite you to join together in our responsive call to worship in your bulletin. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the waters quake in the heart of the sea. As a father has compassion for his children, so the Lord has compassion for those who fear God. As a mother comforts her child, so I will comfort you, says the Lord. Jesus said, "Come to me, all you that labor and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, and you will find rest for your soul." In thanksgiving for the life of Al Fleig, let us worship God.
Please join me in the congregational prayer as printed in your bulletin. Eternal God, amid the changes of life, you alone remain the same. All flesh is as grass, and all its beauty is like the flower of the field. The grass withers and the flower fades, but your word will stand forever. Our hope is in you, O God. Hear our prayer. Turn your ear to our cry and your eye to our tears. You, Lord, are our God, and your love shall have no end. We pray in the living Spirit of Jesus Christ. Amen.
I didn't realize it wasn't a real one. Oh. Okay. First, I want to thank all of you for coming to be with us today as we celebrate the passing of my wonderful husband. It would mean a lot to him to know that you are here and the people who came yesterday. It touches us all, and it helps support us. I want to tell you that after the service, you're all invited to our home at 8705 Burning Tree Road in Bethesda for a Syrian meal, one of his favorites and one of my favorites. So we want you to know you're all welcome. The poem I'm reading is by Ann Spiller. It's called My Lost Love, and many of the words that she uses are words I was saying after he died. And I edited a few things, but not much, because the poetic justice of a widow. It's the first time I ever call myself a widow. Anyway, I have just lost you. The pain is hard to bear. Do I have to go through knowing that you're not here? Please, someone explain to me why he had to go. Are there any reasons? I really need to know. I stand here and remember all the lovely times we shared. The talks, the laughter. I added this, the fights, the pain. Everyone you cared. I am told the pain will ease in time, and I will think of you without a tear. But that will be impossible, as I need to have you here. You were my very world, my ever-guiding star. Just kiss me softly on the cheek and tell me where you are. Thanks. I'll go down that way now that you showed the way.
It is said that King David, the author of the 23rd Psalm, was accustomed to the ups and downs of life and to heartache and loss himself. In the timeless words of the 23rd Psalm, we hear his affirmation, his confession, his belief that though we walk during times of loss and grief, that we do not walk alone. So I invite you to join together in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
The Sciences Sing a Lullaby by Albert Goldbarth. Physics says, go to sleep. Of course you're tired. Every atom in you has been dancing the shimmy in silver shoes nonstop from mitosis to now. Quit tapping your feet. They'll dance inside themselves without you. Go to sleep.
Geology says it will be all right. Slow, inch by inch, America is giving itself to the ocean. Go to sleep. Let darkness lap at your sides. Give darkness an inch. You're not alone. All of the continents used to be one body. You aren't alone. Go to sleep.
Astronomy says the sun will rise tomorrow. Zoology says on rainbow fish and lithe gazelle. Psychology says, but first it has to be night, so biology says the body clocks are stopped all over town, and history says here are the blankets, layer on layer, down and down.
This next poem is called Where Go the Boats by Robert Louis Stevenson. Dark brown is the water, golden is the sand. It flows along forever with trees on either hand.
Green leaves a-floating, castles of the foam, boats of mine a-boating, where will all come home?
On goes the river, and out past the mill, away down the valley, away down the hill.
Away down the river, 100 miles or more, other little children shall bring my boat to shore.
My mom asked that I say a few words on behalf of our family. Al had a huge impact on all of us. As a friend said, he was a character with character. We knew from the start that Al was different. It was the late 80s, early 90s, and we were just getting acquainted. After eating at Roy's, which was one of his favorite family sandwich restaurants in Gaithersburg, we were coming back on the Beltway and we were merging onto Connecticut Avenue. Al drove an Audi 5000 and he drove it pretty aggressively. Depending on whose account of the story you believe, we merged onto the highway and, onto Connecticut Avenue, and he cut somebody off. Again, depending on whose version of the story you believe. But the gentleman in the other car began hurling invectives at our car at a rate that would make a sailor blush. Unfazed, Al continued driving as if nothing had happened. When asked whether he could have done something differently upon merging onto Connecticut Avenue, Al replied very calmly, if the other driver didn't want to crash his car, he would have moved out of the way. So it was with Al. And as usual, he was right. When you come from divorced parents, and the parent with whom you live with starts to date, that relationship over time becomes a family affair. Through it all, if all else is stripped away, one can only hope that the parent is ultimately happy. In the end, that is all that matters. In Mom's case, she won the lottery with Al. Practically speaking, we all did. Al and Mom are perfect for each other in so many ways. Mom likes to cook, Al likes to eat. Al was a fearless traveler, and together they saw the world. They indulged their shared champagne tastes and lived life to the fullest. Over the years, Al was so much more than just a stepfather. He shared all of his interests with us, whether it was birding, carpentry, or scuba diving. His enthusiasm was infectious, but most importantly, he shared of himself. Al loved helping others with their careers and pushed people to be the best that they could be. With Al, there was no ceiling. Al spent a tremendous amount of time helping me with my career, countless hours poring over business plans and resumes and interviewing strategies, much to the chagrin of my mother at times because we were late. It was hard sometimes to tell where Al was leading you until you actually got there. And regardless of where we ended up, he was always kind and deliberate on the journey. In fact, Al would have loved to review these remarks and would have undoubtedly made them better. But no matter how they went or how they were delivered, he would find a way to say something soothing and wholly appropriate to make everything okay. That is just who he was. On behalf of my family, we are truly blessed to have Al as an integral part of our lives. We are all better off because of it. On my behalf, I want to thank you, Al, for everything. And as he used to say before we hung up, bye now.
Venus asked me to talk about Al's role in NASA and all the people he helped in our branch. It amazed me when I looked back at NASA's history that NASA was formed in 1958 and Al joined NASA in 1962. So he was there at the Goddard Space Flight Center, which he loved for over 60 years, when there was just basically two buildings. They always numbered them in the order in which they were produced. I was lucky because, graduate school and undergraduate school had trained me in some of the technical aspects of things, but I really didn't have a very good handle on how you manage the Goddard culture, how you manage, conflicting aims. But I would tell you that Goddard is a family. It's a institution where people are there for 20, 30, 40 years. And I know a number of people in my organization had always hoped to retire before Al did. And some of them are bitterly disappointed. I know Al had a plan originally, and I think Elon Musk let him down. He had planned to keep coming to work as long as in the later years he had a self-driving car. He didn't get that. And I know Allison told me he was looking into dogs because the second part of Al's plan was to get a service dog that would take him from the car to his office and at the appropriate time back from the office to the car, and they would go home. So he really had planned to keep on working, I think. It was fortunate for me because Goddard had gone through some ups and downs in hiring. And typically Goddard is always a little bit understaffed, and it's hard for a junior person to take on, major roles in the center without a mentor. And when it came time for me to take on the work Al had been doing, and it was comforting to know that for the next 30-some years, basically till I retired, Al would be there in my corner helping me negotiate things. Now, I recall sitting in on a meeting where I was reviewing the IT procurements for the center and so on, and one of the associate directors sitting across from me, and she said, I heard you work for Al Fleig, and I said, I do. She said, well, what's a nice kid like you do working with Al? And I said, well, it's my hope that I'm half as good as Al and half as bad, because he had that wonderful way of always getting the important things done and generally making people he bent to his will feel like it was a good thing in the long run. And I would tell you, Al had this wonderful way of telling you stories, and it wasn't always clear what the point of the story was, other than it was interesting. But, later on, you realize that he'd been telling you the story for a reason. One of my favorite ones was Al had been working on the Atlas missile and Poseidon submarines before he joined NASA at 25. But he told me when he went to work on the defense side that they had different colored badges. And one of the badges for the genius people was a particular color, and you were told if the genius person was just staring out into space somewhere or looked like they were asleep, you weren't supposed to disturb them because they were thinking deep thoughts. Now, Al had a way. I guess NASA meetings weren't always the most exciting. I know that when my daughter came to work one day and wrote it up for her elementary school class, she said, well, I went to my dad's 2-hour-long meeting, and I read a book, and they had pastries, and one guy who was Dad's friend looked like he was asleep. And I told her, later when she became a software developer and was having trouble with her hands, eventually you want to move into management. And one trick you should learn from Al Fleig is the ability to go to a meeting, close your eyes and listen anyway, because 80% of the time he wasn't asleep, and the other 20% of the time he didn't know, because he developed a wonderful habit of being able to sit erect and move his hand as if he were writing. So, I think he really knew what the important things were. And I just wanted to say the other unique thing about Al is he managed to get some amazing stuff done, and he really wasn't very concerned about the credit for it. He was the study scientist for YASDIS, which is a huge data system that processes and produces data products from originally three spacecraft, $1 billion each, that study all these important aspects of the Earth. And we would see things on television, fires and floods. And during the Gulf War, we'd help the coalition with their forecasts for sorties and understanding where you could put tanks, but also things like predicting famine. So many things that he accomplished doing that. And the very building we sat in, Building 32, was something he sold to Goddard to produce, and it was designed to be at least double the size. So he never stopped thinking about the future. In fact, somebody came into my office once and saw a picture of Al up on my window and a clock that my wife had given me. It was missing a picture, so I said, well, let's put Al in there. They said, well, is that your dad? I said, no, that guy is responsible for everything you see here. This building, YASDIS, and so on. And I think I would just probably close with the thought that and I would say also he thought ahead about the big problem of people producing products and actually all the information on how it was produced and all the decisions they made getting lost, and so you wouldn't actually be able to understand them. You might reprocess them again and do it all over. And so he spent a good time sort of lobbying for provenance and reproducibility. And I think the other thing that I would tell you, one of the least biggest fans of that was my wife, who worked for DOD and ended up saying, well, all these packages, they keep evolving, and now we can't read your products. So I said, well, Al thought of that too. We end up making converters for you, and we'll ship you the products that you and DOD and NSA all that want, but they can't read all the science data. Because I said it's important not for what you're doing with countering today's problems, but it's important if you want to study things long term to have that. So, but anyway, I really appreciate what Al has done. He mentored me. He mentored the branch chief that came after me. He always was there to work with the ozone folks. My expertise was land. My branch chief, current one's expertise was Earth location, but Al's expertise was ozone. So he not only helped us work all these big projects, he helped keep moving the atmospheric chemistry forward. So really, he was an amazing man, and he was a good friend. And I always found that he had enjoyable stories, and if you were paying attention, you listened to them. And if you weren't, you probably recalled later that Al had mentioned something like this obliquely, and you should have listened in the first place. So that's my memories of Al, and we've always appreciated him, and we were really surprised that he's gone, because none of us, I don't know what, all of us have an age that we consider ourselves to be. We might be 70 years old, but think of ourselves as, in the 30s or something. Al, I think, always had that young person's, cheer and inquisitiveness and sense of adventure. And I think for some of us, that really made a difference. It made work a lot of fun, and I know we'll miss him. Thank you.
Venus asked me to share my final goodbye to Al with you all. Hey, Al, it's your niece, Amanda. I'm calling because I heard you're in the hospital and not feeling well, and I wanted to tell you how much I love you and say a few other things to you. I'm so thankful for you, Al. You've been such an incredible and supportive uncle to me. Thank you for that. You are such a brilliant, funny, kind, patient, and caring person. You are so interested in everything and interesting to talk to. I've always loved our conversations, and I want you to know our conversations have always meant so much to me. I also want you to know I've been so impacted by your interest and encouragement in my career. As I told you when you were in Boston last month, the only reason that I applied to be the U.S. Attorney is that I promised you I would. We had that conversation when you were in the hospital before, and I told you I was thinking about applying, and you made me promise in that conversation that I would do it. I remember it so clearly. And when it came time to apply, I started to get cold feet, and I wasn't sure that I would, but I felt like I had to follow through with it because I had promised you that I would, and so I did. And I want you to know that you are the reason that I did, and it has changed the trajectory of my career. People think of me in that role now, and that's because you encouraged me to reach my highest potential professionally. Thank you, Al. I also want to thank you for being an incredible and loving husband to Venus. You were the perfect partner for her, and it always made me feel so happy to know that you had each other and that you loved her so much, and she loved you. That has always meant so much to me. Thank you for loving her so much and being the perfect match for her. You made her happy. Thank you, Al. When we were last together at dinner, Al, you encouraged me to take more trips, and you told me to take my kids away more. We talked about potential trips I could take and potential trips you wanted to take, and I told you that sounded like a good idea, and I would try to do that. And I will try to do that. So I want you to know, Al, that I promise you today that I will hold you in my heart always for the rest of my life. I will promise I will carry your encouragement with me, and I will reach for my highest potential in both my professional life and my personal life, just as you encouraged me to do, and I will do that because of you. I love you so much, Al. Thank you for everything. And I want to add one thing. I want you to know, Al, that since you've left us, I called in a favor. I've asked that some of the Brunos in heaven come to protect you for me and for all of us. It was your favorite inside joke with me that I had a detail of Brunos protecting me here on earth. I'm still working on that with your help, as you know. Thank you, Al. And may the Brunos in heaven watch over you always.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thank you, David. It's really beautiful. Thanks, Ed. Amanda, I'm already crying. God. I'm going to go full Roman Roy here. I'd really like to thank Ashok and PK and Rob Wolf, Michael, the crew from NASA. You know, Allison, I hadn't seen you for so long, and it brought back memories of Dad that I didn't even know existed anymore, you know? So that really meant a lot. I practiced this thing like 10 times so I wouldn't cry, and I made it about 5 seconds. Dad was the most interesting person that I knew. You know, obviously I'm biased, I'm his son. I remember a time when I was with the Amish, and we were cutting firewood. You know, and you do a lot of talking when you're cutting firewood. And the boy started asking me about my dad. And I said, my stock answer, he was the smartest person I knew. And they said, well, does he believe in Jesus? And I said, no. And they were like, well, then our dad is smarter. And, you know, so our opinions about our families are, you know, not really to be trusted because they were wrong. You know, we spend so much time with people, but in the end, as we get older, it gets distilled down into these little snippets, these stories that we keep with us that help us explain our relationship to them. And that's what I would like to share with you about my dad. Dad was a multifaceted person. You know, I could talk about him for hours. And to be honest, the eulogy that I first prepared was about 45 to 60 minutes long. You know, I realized that wasn't going to work, and I was going to have to focus in on just a few parts of him. So the things I'm going to talk about are his mind, his love for Venus, and who he was as a father. Dad loved to think. He loved ideas and learning and traveling. He once told me that the body exists to move the brain around. Our last name is Fleig. It's a German surname, which is best translated as someone who asks questions to the point of being annoying. I often wonder about our progenitor, who was the first person to be labeled with that surname, and how through all these years and all these generations, this genetic trait has carried through to where it's still so fitting for who my father was. Dad defied easy categorization. He was an independent thinker. His thoughts were his own and were based on his own investigation and analysis, not what he thought whatever group he was a part of would expect of him. He believed in questions. Dad once told me that it's important to find the right answer, but it's more important to ask the right question. He said, if you get the right answer for the wrong question, you wasted your time. But if you ask the right question, you might not get the right answer, but everything that you did in that process would help you to understand. He was someone who understood that life is filled with values that are in tension with each other. He believed that holding that tension was a sign of intellectual integrity and not hypocrisy. Dad was a voracious reader. He would read 2 to 3 books a week. And when you look on his bookshelf, you would see topics, everything from octopus, model trains, wine, Civil War, Alaskan exploration. He read everything, and he was interested in life in all of its complexity. Dad could engage with you in conversation on any topic. He was never out of his depth. And at some point in your conversation with him, he would always say something or ask you a question that would make you reflect on the things that you had previously held to be true. He loved to play the opposition. When Allison and I were growing up, at our family meal, Dad would bring up a topic for us to talk about and argue about. The point wasn't to be right, it was to train our minds to be curious, to think for ourselves, and to not just accept authority. I think that both Allison and I learned that this wasn't always the best strategy to make friends or ingratiate yourself with your boss, but it was something that Dad remained pretty committed to. He was a provocateur. Dad loved making the witty comment that you couldn't quite agree with, but you also couldn't refute. Sorry. I've thought a lot about Dad and Venus and how to talk about their relationship, and ultimately I feel inadequate. They were together for 36 years. Dad was, such a complicated person that I think I'll always have questions about who he was and what he thought, but there was one thing that I always knew to be true, and that's that he loved Venus. He loved her, he loved being with her, and he loved making her happy. I've seen many relationships, but I can't think of one where there was more devotion. I was here visiting Dad just 6 weeks ago, and I think the last thing that we talked about was Venus. To understand my dad and who he was as a father, you need to understand a little bit about his father. My grandfather was a competitive tennis, squash, and golf player. He thrived under pressure and always played better when someone was betting against him. He couldn't stand to lose, and that included to his son and to his grandson. Ultimately, this was a philosophy that Dad rejected. He did a lot of sports, horseback riding, skydiving, skiing, scuba diving, but none of them were competitive. In his fantasy life, he loved the rugged individualist, the dominant man who could inspire fear around him. But in life, he always rooted for the underdog. I think this was a fundamental part of his persona that overrode anything else. When we were young, our dog ran away and we had to go get a new dog. And we ended up going to a corgi breeder. And we got there, and Dad picked a corgi. And the breeder made the mistake of telling Dad that this was the runt of the litter and would never amount to anything in the show arena. And Dad said, well, we'll see about that. When we got home, God got right way training the dog, and he worked, eventually hired a professional show man to take Polo to competitions. And any time that breeder was bringing one of their dogs to the competition, Dad would bring Polo. And Polo won and beat all the dogs. And eventually, the breeder came to Dad and he said, I gotta tell you, I was wrong. And that was it. No more shows. And that's the way Dad was with everything. When it came to a point where he felt like someone was too dominant, it was over. Dad was easy with compliments. He liked to encourage people. But the times that I remember when he was most proud were when it was something that involved struggle. He took me to a camp when I was 15, and in order to go into the lake, you had to swim across the camp to one side and swim back. And the whole time while you were swimming, the camp instructor was in the canoe, and he was telling Dad, "Your son isn't a very good swimmer. I don't think he can do it. Think we should bring him in the boat?" And, I just kept on swimming. And when, we finally got, and he was like, "Well, he made it." Dad was like, "Damn right he did." Being a parent is a daunting, challenging, and often thankless task. I started having children late in life. My oldest child is only 5, and I already have so many questions. I spent a lot of time this last week thinking about Dad as a parent, and I feel like I've come to understand more about him in this week than I did in all the time before. He loved being a parent. He loved creating traditions and memories. He loved traveling and exposing people to different places, cultures, ideas, and ways of life. When I think about our grandfather and who he was, it's remarkable to me that my father was so balanced. Most of the time when you have a parent who's so focused on one area, you end up either completely imitating that focus or rejecting it. But Dad was able to take the grit and determination that Granddad had and keep it, but not take it to the point where it became toxic. I'm almost done. Being a parent seems to be a never-ending balance of loving your children, helping them, and letting them learn on their own. Dad did a lot for me. But one thing that he never did and he didn't believe in was making life easy. When the chips were down and I was in danger, he would always be there for me, and he would do just enough to keep me going. After that, it was up to me to figure it out. A few years ago, I asked Dad about a time that I had when I was young. I went to this school, Green Acres, which was love and flowers and hippies. And then I transferred to a school, Georgetown Day School, which was a little bit more, cliquey, I guess. And, to be honest, it was horrible. I was bullied. There was one day where everyone in the class signed a letter saying that they hated me, And I asked Dad, I said, "Dad, did you know about all the shit that happened to me?" Oh, sorry. And he said, "Yeah, I did." And I was like, "What?" I was shocked because I figured, he didn't know. And I said, "Well, why didn't you pull me out of the school?" And he said, "Well, I figured you needed to learn how to deal with it." That's who he was. Dad believed that being a parent was about preparing your children to stand on their own. I'm still developing my identity as a parent, and I'm lucky to be doing it together with my wife, Lauren. I'm never going to be able to ask Dad for help or advice again. But the truth is, I know what he would say. He was never someone to really dive into the details with me, but he would tell me that I'm strong, I'm smart, I'm capable, I have the skills, and if I put in the work and don't give up, I'll figure it out. I love you, Dad. I respect you. You have been and always will be my hero. I miss you, and you did it. Allison and I are ready.
Good afternoon. I want to start by thanking Venus for taking care of me over the past week. I wouldn't have done it without you. I needed you, your companionship, and your guidance. I felt that being with you and loving you this week was creating a connection between me and my father. I want to thank you for designing such a beautiful service and for inviting the speakers that you invited, who moved me deeply. I want to thank our hosts for allowing us to join this community. My father, who was an only child, didn't even have any cousins, grew up in a very, very small family, and I think he was always looking for community and connections. And so I want to also thank all of you who are here. I think when I think about how small his family was, even when he was 50 years old, not just as a child, it's amazing to me to see this collection of people. I've decided for my part of the ceremony to read aloud an email my dad sent me a couple of years ago. It's one of thousands of emails that he sent me over the past 33 years. He was, for a long time, my only email correspondent. He had sent me to college with a modem and an email address at a time when he was literally the only person I knew who had an email address, and consequently the only person with whom I could exchange emails. He taught me to use a program called Kermit with a modem that had a NASA barcode on it. I worry a little bit that he might get in trouble. All these years later, it was somehow almost like espionage or a transgression to be using a Goddard system to tell Dad about my grade in my German class, but he wanted me to have this new technology and to learn and master it. I don't have any of those very old emails, but I have scores of emails that he sent me between 2014 and 2020, a time period in which, for some reason, Dad forwarded me hundreds of emails from various NASA and other scientific listservs. He would start each message with a little introduction explaining to me why he was sending me something from Geoscientific News or a call for papers from NASA. Most of them were designed to get me to apply for funding from NASA with elaborate arguments demonstrating how I, a historian specializing in Central and Eastern Europe, was qualified for this geoscientific fellowship. And the email I'm going to read is one of these. Now, David Connolly warned me, and he's now proven himself to be a master speaker, to watch out for things that were actually about me. And when my dad wrote this email, he thought it was about me. But when I read it, I hope you'll agree with me that it tells us a lot about him. Okay. First, two explanatory remarks. First, my childhood nickname was Mouse until Dad married Venus. Venus doesn't do mice. They aren't really that cute. They certainly aren't models for women. Venus once gave me a bookmark. It was a little chain with a mouse on one end and a cat on the other, and she pinned a little note to it that said, "Be the cat." Dad didn't think there was anyone on Earth I could learn more from than Venus, so in the email I'm going to read, you'll see him trying to find a different nickname that would help me model myself more on her example, smart and tough. And the second explanatory remark is that I wrote a dissertation about the oil industry in Western Ukraine in the 19th century and how it was underregulated. because people started exploiting oil locally before there was widespread awareness that it would become such a critically important commodity that needed very careful federal, I would argue, oversight. You'd be forgiven for thinking that this is an obscure topic with no contemporary relevance. I think there are 5 people on the planet, including my husband, Walter, who have read my dissertation. When we were cleaning the house to get ready for the reception that Venus is hosting this afternoon, I found it on my dad's coffee table, and Venus told me that he read it all the time. I don't know if that's true, but thank you for saying it. All right, that's the background. Okay, here's the email in my dad's words. Okay, space tigress. Here it is, the first message about various U.S. agencies positioning to be in charge of deep space technology. Right now, they are just squabbling about who gets to approve individual spacecraft designs and missions. There is not a word about establishing overall goals or objectives, or the philosophical and/or legal basis for human activities in deep space. But my guess is that this is kind of like when the U.S. government first started thinking about what to do to protect the environment. There was a certain amount of bickering about who could or should control what. Then, shazam, the EPA was created in just a few months. Our neighbor Terry came to Washington as a visiting scholar from the political science department at Bowdoin. He just wanted to see how government really worked. Someone asked him to draft some thoughts about how an environmental agency might function, so he did. Somebody passed a bill to establish such an agency, and some Washington politically acceptable person was appointed to run it. Whoever that was realized nobody really knew what it should do or how it might work, so they asked Terry if instead of returning to Bowdoin and being a political scientist, as was his plan, would he consider being the deputy administrator of the EPA. He said he still didn't really understand how government works, but okay, he would do it. And he did it for the next 20 years. So, Tiger, read the bottom article and seize the moment, not to be the deputy what's-it, but rather, 1, to assemble and chair an interagency advisory panel, 2, then to do the same thing for the UN, 3, then to be the Tsarina Tigress of space when we meet our first aliens. And here comes my favorite line. Your relative lack of scientific current knowledge in this field means you would be open to the ideas of all participants, which seems to be a big issue in the desired qualifications. I will set up interviews for you with the right people while you are here. The space community is establishing a base for taking things from space and what the rules should be. They are also hoping to find other intelligent life forms and what the rules for interaction should be. I do not see anyone talking about not polluting other planets. Think of what the oil industry did to Lviv. Think of slavery if we find skilled but weaker life forms, and this is a parenthetical remark, dolphins, whales, slaves. They need you, even if they do not know it. Lots more fun than doing taxes, exclamation point. Hail Tsarina, exclamation point. Love pop. Okay, so that's a harder promise to keep, Amanda, than applying for a job as I didn't apply to be Tsarina of Tigress of Space for when we meet our first aliens, but maybe David can help me work up the resume that I'll need to do it. I don't know if Terry's here. I bet he doesn't know that my dad told me this story. In fact, I bet many of you don't realize how many stories he told about you and how much he loved telling them. We always heard the stories about others, and I think we're not always aware of how he boasted and bragged about our own accomplishments. The stories Dad told about his own life always revolved around his most unlikely achievements. When he decided in his 60s to become a scuba diver and to volunteer to feed fish inside the large tanks at the National Aquarium in Baltimore, Dad had to pass a rigorous test. Okay, written test, no problem, perfect score on the first try. The swimming test, which involved swimming through a hula hoop without touching the sides, same size hula hoop for all of the people taking the test, Only after several attempts could he steer with enough precision to maneuver his, let's say, 250-pound frame through its narrow circumference, swimming through a hula hoop, one of the proudest achievements of a PhD in space science. These are the kinds of stories he also loved to tell about you, not your easiest successes or your greatest professional accomplishments, but the ones you worked hardest for, the ones that seemed most unlikely. The kid who showed up at NASA wet behind the ears and then became the world's leading expert in ozone, or his boss, or an ultramarathoner. I think there are actually a lot of people who came wet behind the ears and then ended up becoming his boss by the time he had retired. The recent law graduate who didn't know how he was ever going to get his first job and ended up as president of his professional association. The pretty little scuba diving companion who had no trouble swimming through the hula hoop, who was also a murderously tough roller derby player. I don't know her name, but I've heard about her roller derby exploits on many occasions. The 5-foot-tall lacrosse mom targeted for a financial scam who turned out to be an anti-fraud expert, didn't even need her Brunos, actually. The woman who went back to school at 50 to get a master's in public health, the middle-aged banker who swam under a boat in a storm to cut a lobster trap out of a propeller and save his family's life, the grandfather who became a published playwright and a master's of social work in his 70s, the one-time lifeguard who could amass scores of letters in support of his bid to be a judge. I could go on until I had listed something that each of you has accomplished. The octopus who outsmarted its aquarium tenders, that's one of his favorites. Doctors, newscasters, runners, debaters, athletes, teachers, students, managers, singers, poets, storytellers, Emmy Award nominees. Dad believed in all of us. He loved our unlikeliest successes. He wanted us to know one another and to learn from one another. I have to stop talking. My time is up. I have so many more stories to share, and I know that you do as well. Stories about his stories, about the problems he tried to solve, about the people he bragged about instead of boasting about his own accomplishments. He loved being a problem solver. We were the problems, but we were also the successes he enjoyed the most. When you miss him, call one of those people. When you miss him, make yourself do something hard, something you aren't sure you can do, knowing he was sure you could do it. When you miss him, call Venus, because she was his sun, his moon, his stars, his favorite planet. When you miss him, train a dog, admire an octopus, be kind to a dolphin. When you miss him, write your senators or congressmen and hold them accountable for their asinine policies and for sending you too much unsolicited mail. When you miss him, give $25, but not more, to the Nature Conservancy. When you miss him, read an article in a science magazine that explains how something works and then tell someone. When you miss him, look in the mirror and say, Al Fleig believed in me. I can do it. Thank you.
Please be seated. Heard different accounts and perspectives a little bit on Al's theology. I knew him a bit here as Venus and Al attended, but I've learned a lot about him today. I will note that in the Christian and frankly the Hebrew Bible tradition of the Jewish church before, asking and living the questions is a deep part of faith. Telling stories is connected to both people and to belief. And that the great rabbis, they say, of the tradition were focused on questions more than answers. I think about the 23rd Psalm and the question of being watched over and protected in heaven. And the idea that goodness and mercy follows me all the days of my life and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever is a deep theology of the protection of being watched over in heaven. I love the idea from the obituary in the paper that it is never too late to create your own happiness by surrounding yourself with the people you love. It is clear to me that Al certainly did that for 36 years and more with Venus, but with all of those of you who are gathered here today. The idea of surrounding oneself with those you love shows a deep belief of someone who believes in others. And finally, I would note that the idea of closing your eyes and listening anyway is what a wise person once defined as prayer. And so please join me in praying. Loving God, we give you thanks for gathering us today to celebrate the amazing life of Al Fleig. We thank you for his mind and his heart, for his 60-year commitment to work, to Goddard, to NASA, to his colleagues. We thank you for his devotion to Venus, to his pride in his children, his extended family, all of those in his family, and his love of his friends. We thank you for Go and for scuba diving, for storytelling and for adventures, for advice and for mentoring, for walking journeys near and far with those who knew him well and for those who came to reflect later on the wisdom of his words. Eternal God, we thank you for all those who have finished their race and now rest from their labor. And we thank you for Al, whom you have received into your presence. Help us to believe where we have not seen, trusting that you too will lead us through our years. Give us hope for glad reunion in the life to come. Allow us to know through our faith, through our hope, through our love, the wisdom of Paul that nothing in life or death will ever be able to separate us from your love. And so whether we come with the keen mind of a scientist, the heart of a poet, the caring of a father, the devotion of a husband, the wisdom of a good friend. Whether we come with our heart broken in grief or our mind turns towards reflective gratitude on a life lived well, hold us this day, keep us this hour, and connect us deeply to walk our journey with the idea that Al believes in us and goes with us. For we are all deeply connected in the Spirit, and in that hope of deep connection with you and with each other, we say now the prayer that Jesus teaches us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Reminder that, please be seated. A reminder that following our postlude, as Venus has graciously invited us to join at her home on Burning Tree, the address is in your bulletin, where we continue to share our stories of Al. And now, may you be surrounded by the peace and love of Christ. May the Holy Spirit hold you, and may Almighty God bless you and keep you this day and always. Amen.